Hey Dragon Slayers! Today's video is about my first attempt at fasting from Jimmy Moore. Don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out. Let's get started. So Jimmy writes that despite his attempt to turn around his diet, although it didn't stop him from enjoying eating, his skepticism about intermittent fasting just sort of increased a little. He was intrigued by what Dr. Adis had to say about it, though, and he did his homework. One thing that Jimmy learned in particular made him sit up and take notice. In 2009, he was interviewed at the Boston College biology professor Thomas L. Seyfried, who had been researching alternative treatments for cancer prevention and treatment, including a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet to treat brain cancer and other cancers. One of the more interesting and memorable nuggets from that half-hour interview came at the very end of their conversation, when Dr. Seyfried made a bold assertion that annual 7 to 10 day water fast could be a useful tool for preventing cancer. Wow. But as skeptical as Jimmy was about intermittent fasting, a 1 week fast freaked him out even more. Who could actually do that? But by that point, Jimmy had heard enough to convince him to give fasting a try. Needless to say, he had to get his head around intermittent fasting before he even dared to try a multi-day fast. And being the nothing's too hard adventurer that Jimmy was, he decided to try it. And boy, oh boy, what was he getting himself into? So his first attempt at fasting, it was very interesting. And before we get to the good stuff about fasting, Jimmy has to be honest about the bad stuff. And all he has to say about his first attempt at alternate day intermittent fasting for 24 hours every other day. Ugh. I mean, he literally screams. He said that it lasted exactly 4 days, 19 hours, and 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. He did a lot of things wrong that made this attempt much more painful than it should have ever been. But before Jimmy explains that so you can learn from his mistakes, here is what he's learned about himself during his first unpleasant experience of intermittent fasting back in 2006. Number one, he was still pretty addicted to caffeine still. The first day of fasting was painful because he had a massive headache for most of the day. By the second day, though, the headache had subsided. Thing number two is that he hadn't felt truly hungry in a long time. After losing 180 pounds, his philosophy had been to never allow himself to get hungry so that he didn't slip back into those old eating habits. Ironically, during his low-fat dieting days, all he did was have hunger pangs. Now, listening to his body is beneficial because he doesn't have the same food temptations. Number three was being ravenously hungry made him overeat. At the end of his second fasting day, his wife Christine and him went to a steak and ale for their all-you-can-eat prime rib special. They were busy, so the steaks took longer to come out to the table than they usually would do. He was so hungry that he ate a whole plate of salad in 2 minutes, devouring the first prime rib, waited 20 minutes for his second one, and killed that one too. Then the server brought him another one about 30 minutes later, after the food had settled in his stomach a bit and he started to eat it, but then he got halfway done and man, he was super full. Not just full, but like really, really full. It hurt so much he had to take some Tums and lie down for a bit when he got home. He was quite the ravenous beast. Number four, eating enough food to fuel his daily workouts really was important. On day one of his fast, he tried to keep up the same resistance and speed on the elliptical, but it just didn't happen. While he usually would have a 13 resistance at 8.5 miles an hour, he had to back off to 7 resistance at 7 miles an hour to keep the workout as long as usual. Of course, he burned a few calories as well. What was worse was that even on the days he did eat, a very noticeable lack of energy persisted, and his energy did not return until ending the intermittent fasting experiment. It took several weeks to get back to full strength and endurance. Number 5, for Jimmy, at the time, going without food for 24 hours was not realistic. On the first day, his head was hurting so much from the caffeine withdrawals that he barely noticed how hungry and lightheaded he felt. But on the second day of fasting, he felt like he was floating on his office above and over the tip of anything. His body was lethargic and felt disassociated from everything, as if he was living in another world. His coworkers kept asking him if he was okay. He wasn't his normal chipper self. Call him a wimp for not making it through one whole week of intermittent fasting, but that was just not for him. And there's a few reasons why. So, first, he was still drinking diet sodas during the fast, and that stoked hunger and cravings that he wouldn't otherwise have had. Secondly, he wasn't getting enough salt during the fast, which led to fatigue and energy drain. Better than those diet sodas would have been bone broth with sea salt, which provides much needed electrolytes and is satisfying. And finally, Jimmy just didn't have the right mindset. He didn't anticipate how tough it would be in the beginning, and he wasn't prepared to handle the hunger at all, both real and imagined. After this first attempt at intermittent fasting crashed and burned into a blaze of glory, he didn't think he'd try it again. But then in 2011, after some gentle prodding from people like Rob Wolf and other intermittent fasting advocates, he decided to give it another go. That's what I've got for you guys today. Don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out. And remember, guys, that together, you and I will slay the dreaded diabetes dragon.